Hello and welcome to China Forum, the leading program for discussing the latest in trends and development in modern Chinese culture, politics, economics, and social issues. My name is Shannon Tiezi, and I'll be your moderator for our program today. Today on China Forum, Dr. Richard Bush will be joining us to discuss his new book, Uncharted Strait: The Future of China-Taiwan Relations. Dr. Bush holds the Michael H. Armacost Chair at the Brookings Institution, where he directs the Center of Northeast Asian Policy Studies. He served as chairman and managing director of the American Institute in Taiwan from 1997 to 2002. His previous books include The Perils of Proximity, China-Japan Security Relations, and Untying the Knot, Making Peace in the Taiwan Strait. Dr. Bush, thank you for joining us today.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks. There's a lot to talk about when it comes to the complex relationship between China, Taiwan, and the United States. Let's begin by discussing the title of your book, Uncharted Strait. One of your main points is that today there are more possibilities for the future of the China-Taiwan relationship than there have been in recent memory. Could you discuss for our viewers a little bit about what brought China and Taiwan into these uncharted waters?
For a number of years, basically from 1995 until 2008, there was a lot of tensions between China and Taiwan. It was a situation of mutual fear, and each side worried that the other side was going to take actions that would threaten its fundamental interest. And so it responded by toughening up its position, which only made the other side more afraid. And all the analysis and all the writing that occurred during that period was focused on the dangers of conflict and even the dangers of war. Obviously, this was a situation that the United States worried about. We want good relations with each side of the strait. After 2008, when Ying-jeou became Taiwan's president, we moved into a new era, one that we hadn't had to think about. President Ma and his Chinese counterpart, Hu Jintao, sought to find a basis for cooperation, not conflict. And they sought to broaden the areas of positive interaction, particularly in the economic area. The two of them deserve a lot of credit because I'm sure there were people in each of their systems who questioned whether the search for cooperation really made sense. There were some who probably feared that if our side takes risks for peace, the other side will just take advantage of us and we'll be in a worse position. But fortunately, it worked out. And the potential that was always there for cooperation in the economic area and some other areas has been realized. And the situation between the two is much more stable, less tense, more predictable, and it's a much better situation for the United States as well.
But you did mention in your book that there has been a lot of economic cooperation, but that this will not necessarily lead to any stabilization in the political realm. Could you talk a little bit about the connection or maybe the disconnect between these two concepts of economic and political stabilization?
Okay. The key here lies in what's the conceptual basis for talks and negotiation and signing agreements. And as far as China is concerned, there's a fundamental interest between the political area and the economic area, and for Taiwan as well. China has been willing to say that for the purposes of economic cooperation and cooperation in the cultural area, we're not going to have to nail down the sort of legal and political definition of what Taiwan is. That's a political matter. And so let's expand the areas of cooperation by deferring that issue, by, in effect, agreeing to disagree on what Taiwan is, on what the Republic of China is. President Ma was willing to do that. And what we've seen over the last 5 years is the result. China has made fairly clear that if we're going to move to the political area or the security area, which China would actually like to do, we need to have a more explicit definition of what this one China is and how Taiwan fits in it. And that's where the impasse is. President Ma has made explicitly clear that because of that conceptual gap, it's premature to even think about having political talks.
And because of this, you mentioned that there's a real possibility that the cooperation momentum will stall out because a lot of the easier economic agreements have been made and the time doesn't seem quite right for political cooperation. So what are the prospects for China-Taiwan relations moving forward throughout the rest of Ma Ying-jeou's term?
Actually, there's a lot that can be done still in the economic area. In June of 2010, the two sides agreed on an Economic Cooperation Framework Agreement, ECFA. And that framework agreement specified 5 follow-on agreements that needed to be done. One of those has already been signed, and that has to do with investment protection. Also to be done are an agreement on trade and services. The word from Taiwan is that that agreement's basically done. It could be signed soon. Then there's an agreement on trade and services. Finally, an agreement on dispute resolution. All of these are difficult because they involve the domestic interests on each side, domestic industries and so on. But one can expect that over the course of President Ma's second term through 2016, they will make progress in these areas. There are probably other aspects of the economic relationship that could be formalized through agreements. There may be potential in the cultural area. Taiwan would like to have more mainland students attending Taiwan universities at both the undergraduate and the graduate level. China would like to have agreements in the cultural area. For example, they would like the treasures of Taiwan's National Palace Museum to circulate in China. There's some legal issues that have to be resolved, though. It is possible that on the political area, you could have discussions take place among scholars of the two sides that would help clarify the issues and maybe chart a tentative and draft set of ideas on how to bridge the cultural gap, the conceptual gap that I mentioned before. It appears that China and Taiwan in the security area have some informal military confidence building measures. These could be formalized. Perhaps others that are beneficial to Taiwan could be discussed. So there's a lot of work to be done. Finally, and this is probably the most important, it's imperative for both China and Taiwan to implement well the agreements that they've already negotiated for their own sake, so that each side realizes the benefits of the cooperation promised. And second, in order to set a record for any future negotiations. I mean, if you are going to go into political talks, you want to make sure, based on past experiences, that the commitments that the other side makes are going to be followed. And that's more important in the difficult areas than it is in the easy areas, as important as it is in the easy areas. So the two sides should work hard to make sure that what they've agreed to actually gets carried out.
Sure. Now, there are some people, including those within Taiwan domestically, who disapprove of Ma Ying-jeou's actions. They think that, especially in the economic field, opening Taiwan to further trade with China is going to result in increased dependence on China, which will be bad for Taiwan in the long run. How would you respond to these sorts of arguments?
The main counter-argument, I think, is that for any economy like Taiwan that's in the middle of the global economic hierarchy, it is extremely important to remain competitive on a global basis. That's the only way you survive. I mean, that's a challenge for the United States, frankly. One of the ways you do that is to liberalize your economic relations with all your major trading partners, because that not only opens markets that are useful for promoting exports, but it also forces some structural adjustment within your economy, that those sectors that are really unprofitable and may have been protected in the past essentially go out of business or find ways to do something new. It also may stimulate the emergence of new sectors that haven't existed before. China has liberalized its economic relations with one of its major trading partners, China, or it's in the process of doing so. It needs to do so also with the United States, Japan, Europe, and so on, both for direct competitive reasons, but also for the structural adjustment. President Ma understands the need to do this. He has made clear to the public that this requires the removal of protectionist barriers, that it will require some pain, but that Taiwan really has no choice given the global position it's in. And you know, there will be winners and losers, but you have to address these challenges anyway.
We recently saw a leadership transition on mainland China, and one of the changes that was made is Chen Deming, who is the former commerce minister for China, has become the head of China's Association for Relations across the Taiwan Strait. So should we expect from that, since he is a former commerce minister, that China is viewing its relations with Taiwan as mainly still in the phase of economic cooperation?
That's probably the case. China's officials who have managed Taiwan policy so far have talked about the next few years as being a time of consolidation and good implementation, and that makes sense. They have talked about moving forward at the pace that Taiwan politics allows. So in that respect, Mr. Chen is probably a good person to be at the on the front lines of China's negotiations with Taiwan. I would also note that Chen Deming doesn't make policy; he implements it, and the people who make policy are in the Chinese governmental system, starting with President Xi Jinping at the top and other people who are responsible for external policy. And if they decide that something needs to be done in the political area, then it will be done, or they will at least try to get it done. And Chairman Chen will sort of carry out those policies.
I know it's still very early.
Correct.
But are there any indications, however vague they might be at this point, that Xi Jinping will start to look at a new approach, or is he more inclined to stick towards Hu Jintao's gradualist approach towards Taiwan?
It's impossible to say because it is early and because it's the nature of the Chinese system that a rising leader doesn't advertise any deviations that he might undertake from established policies. Some of the new officials who are responsible for Taiwan policy have talked about the hope at some point in the future to moving towards political talks, you know, starting at the track 2 level and moving up to track 1. But so far it appears that gradualism remains the order of the day, that the focus is on the so-called easy areas, ones where there is mutual benefit, and gradually reshaping China's image and reputation on Taiwan.
When it comes to political talks, China has always put forth the idea of one country, two systems as a potential model for reunification, which is also the way that they brought Hong Kong and Macau back under PRC rule. So when Taiwan looks at Hong Kong and Macau now, how does that affect their attitude towards the one country, two systems formula that's been proposed for Taiwan as well?
Right. One country, two systems is actually the formula for the final resolution of the Taiwan dispute. Political talks that might occur in the next decade, let's say, they're really about an intermediate stage. But I think the main reason that one country, two systems is unacceptable on Taiwan has to do with the political arrangements in Taiwan. And it's very clear that China, in writing the rules of the game for the Hong Kong political system, did so in a way that ensured that individuals and political forces that Beijing doesn't like never get to power. And so it's very difficult, if not impossible, for Hong Kong's Democratic Party and other allied parties to win a majority in the Legislative Council. It is difficult or impossible for a candidate from that part of the political spectrum to even get nominated for the contest for the region's chief executive position. So the question arises, what would China expect of the Taiwan political system under one country, two systems? There's really no answer to that, but an arrangement where the Democratic Progressive Party could never win a majority of the legislature and its leader not able to become Taiwan's president is probably unacceptable, or it is unacceptable.
And in your book, you point out that the main core of the political gap between China and Taiwan is the question over Taiwan's sovereignty, which is obviously a very complicated question,
right.
But I wonder if you could sort of distill the debate briefly for our viewers so they understand how China and Taiwan are having such difficulty engaging.
Okay. This issue has existed actually for about 20 years, and it's been the core obstacle. And it refers to a couple of different things. First of all, it touches on Taiwan's role in the international system. And China has worked very hard to restrict that role. In the last 20 years, Taiwan has tried to expand it, and there continues to be a struggle. Second, it refers to the political arrangements in Taiwan and whether an outside party, Beijing, is able to dictate certain outcomes or dictate that certain outcomes won't occur. Then it concerns the question of, do the Taiwan authorities have the absolute right to rule in the territory under their jurisdiction? What this comes down to is really the question of the Republic of China, which was founded in 1912, which existed on the mainland until October 1949, and then relocated to Taiwan, and it's been there ever since. It doesn't have that much of a presence in the international community, but it has some. Certainly, the Kuomintang, the nationalist party which has dominated Taiwan for most of the last 60 years, believes very firmly in the existence of the Republic of China. The Democratic Progressive Party is willing up to a point to acknowledge it. China's
gap in the coming decades, it seems like one side or the other is going to have to compromise pretty substantially for there to be any forward progress.
Right. The one sign of hope that I see is that some scholars in China have started to say publicly that we, the PRC, are going to have to address the issue of the ROC. This is not going to go away, and they don't have any ideas at this point of how to do it, but just the fact that they're putting the issue on the agenda of discourse, is a good thing. Whether the leaders take on this challenge is another question, but that's a small positive sign.
Oh, it seems pretty obvious the Chinese government is in favor of unification, but Taiwan's government is a democracy and they have to be responsive to popular opinion.
Right.
You cite several polls in the book that indicate the Taiwanese people are generally in favor of keeping some sort of the status quo. Do you think this is sustainable indefinitely? How long can we keep the status quo going?
I have something of a problem with these polls because the terms are never defined. I mean, the choice is basically between independence, status quo, and unification. And it's not clear on the face of it what formula or what the content is of each of these terms. I mean, one presumes when the respondents hear the word unification, they think one country, two systems. It would be very interesting to see how Taiwan voters would respond if China put forward a different formula for unification, something more accommodating to Taiwan than one country, two systems. I think essentially what the majority opinion in favor of the status quo means is that the situation we have is much better than any of the alternatives. So let's just stick with that. Independence might bring us war. One country, two systems might bring us an intolerable subordination to Beijing. We have the United States at our back. So let's just stick with what we have and what we know rather than to go into a future that we can't predict.
You mentioned the Taiwan Independence movement, which is the other option from Taiwan's perspective. This has given the Beijing government a lot of headaches and caused a lot of worries. Today, how big of a factor is the movement towards Taiwanese independence now, especially with Beijing's growing military power, and they've made it clear this is not acceptable to them? So is Taiwan independence still even on the table when it comes to options for Taiwan?
This is still a segment of the Taiwan political spectrum. Some recent polls suggested that between a quarter and a third of the Taiwan public want independence so badly that they're willing to risk war to have it. But I think that this represents one part of the Democratic Progressive Party. I think for most everybody else, either the status quo or some kind of unification is more acceptable. I also think that Taiwan's democratic system is now an obstacle to any serious movement to Taiwan independence because of the risk that war would follow a declaration of some kind. It's a very pragmatic attitude. And this is probably going to grow because the people who seem to be most strongly in favor of a Republic of Taiwan are the older generation of the native Taiwanese. And they will die off, and they will be replaced by others who are more pragmatic.
You've outlined for us a lot of the changes that have taken place in China-Taiwan relations. So how does the U.S. fit into this evolving scenario? Does the U.S. still function as a deterrent against China becoming too coercive? How is it playing a part in China-Taiwan relations?
The United States, first of all, is a deterrent. We have at least an implicit security commitment to Taiwan. It's not a blanket commitment, but it's serious. China, by virtue of the military capabilities that it's acquiring, seems to assume that if there's a war over Taiwan, we will be involved. There are certain things it wouldn't be spending billions of dollars on if it didn't believe that. I think that we also serve as a sort of a barometer of how things are going. You know, it makes a difference whether we say that, as we do, that the current trend is good. I'm sure that China would like to have us say that we support unification, but we're not going to do that. We never have. We say we support a peaceful resolution, but we stay away from any discussion of the content of what that resolution might be. Finally, to the extent that Taiwan sees a value in liberalizing with the United States economically, I think we should support that because it puts Taiwan in a stronger position.
So we're almost out of time, but very briefly, what are the prospects for the U.S. changing its attitude towards Taiwan, or will it stay the same?
I think the prospects are pretty low. There have been some Americans who've suggested that our strategic relationship with China is so important that we should, in effect, abandon Taiwan. There are other people who say, well, Taiwan's getting very close to the mainland, it's abandoning us. I think the mainstream is in the sort of complicated middle, that it's in our interest that we support Taiwan. It's in our interest that any resolution be not coercive and be voluntary and so on. And that's a good place for us to be.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Bush, for discussing this. Thank you to our viewers for joining us. If you want to know more, be sure to check out Dr. Bush's new book, Uncharted Straight. And we will see you next time on China Forum.